Section IV. Ecological Systems of Knowledge. Beginning in the 1960s, artists interested in both ecology and informational systems started to think of artworks as a kind of ecosystem. While ecology as a field of modern science is approximately a century and a half old, the notion of an ecosystem was conceived considerably later. First coined in 1935, ecosystems initially designated interconnections defined primarily by the agency of animal organisms, particularly through the model of the food chain. However, following the conclusion of the Second World War and the rise of a field of information science called cybernetics, ecosystems were understood through robust systems theories derived from new computing technologies. The most prominent of these is the paradigm of the steady-state. This steady-state ecosystem was characterized by a consistent order that was assumed to be both predictable and unchanging over time. Steady-state ecology remained the dominant scientific model and means to imagine global connectivity during the 1960s and the rise of the environmental movement. These basic assumptions about ecosystems started to be challenged in the years that followed, when a picture of ecological change as unpredictable and even chaotic overtook the previous assumption of unwavering stability. Based on longer-term studies, scientists realized that ecosystems do not have a natural and timeless steady state, but instead consist of a balance of relationships that are invariably altered over time by the influx of unpredictable factors. Part of the debate at that time turned on whether ecological systems were open or closed. Open systems are those that can incorporate new elements and be structured, changed, and reinvigorated over time. Closed systems, by contrast, are limited to the original conditions of the system. While many of the conversations about complicated and highly specialized fields of knowledge like ecology, cybernetics, and systems theory took place, artist and writer Jack Burnham wrote an influential piece of art criticism published in 1968 on systems aesthetics. Among experts in the late 20th century, the core ideas of these fields filtered into a more general perspective on the planet among artists and the general public alike. Artists, in particular, began to experiment with the ways in which works of art might also be conceived of as self-contained systems while also being part of larger systems. These tendencies were grouped together as systems aesthetics by the curator and art historian Jack Burnham in an influential piece of art criticism published in 1968. 36 in the works discussed in this section of the resource guide. From the early 1970s to the early 2010s, we see an evolving perspective on how open or closed the ecological systems of art are and the role that new technologies might play in the creation and display of visual art. Selected work: Helen and Newton Harrison, Shrimp Farm, Survival Piece No. 2, 1971. Helen and Newton Harrison were art collaborators and partners in life. Helen Mayer Harrison, 1927 to 2018, was born in Queens, New York, and studied English and education before pursuing a teaching career in the 1940s. Newton Harrison, 1932 to 2022, was born in Brooklyn, New York, and studied art at the Pennsylvania Academy of the Fine Arts. Helen and Newton were married in 1953 and lived abroad in Florence, Italy, from 1957 to 1960. During the first 2 decades of their marriage, Newton Harrison worked as a solo artist, but beginning in the late 1960s, the Harrisons began working together on a collaborative art practice that lasted throughout the remainder of their careers. Vital in establishing the activist engagement and informed interdisciplinarity of much of the contemporary eco-art produced in the last half-century, the Harrisons were true pioneers. From the outset of their collaboration as artists, the Harrisons produced works that had a tangible impact on the environment. An early example is Making Earth, a work they first performed in 1970 and would recreate many times. The work consists, quite simply but profoundly, of the production of rich soil. After Helen and Newton Harrison were vital in establishing understanding that topsoil was endangered worldwide, the activist engagement and informed interdisciplinary tie-off much of the contemporary eco-art produced in the last. They commented, "We made Earth many times. The half-century first was sand, clay, sewage sludge, leaf material, and photo credit. The Harrison studio chicken, cow and horse manure. These elements were gathered, mixed, watered, mixed again and again over a 4-month period until it had a rich, forest floor smell and could be tasted." 37. While early artworks like Making Earth were carried out largely in private, the Harrisons introduced their practice to much larger audiences with a series of works titled The Survival Pieces, which were produced for museums from 1970 to 1972. For each of these survival works, the Harrisons fashioned a living ecosystem for a predetermined period of time. Shrimp Farm, Survival Piece No. 2 was staged at an exhibition titled Art and Technology at the Los Angeles County Museum of Art LACMA, which ran from May 10 to August 29, 1971, as the culmination of a notoriously expensive and generally unsuccessful program, 1967 to 1971, to pair artists with the research and development departments of corporations in order to create collaborative work. However, the Harrisons' contribution to LACMA show was created without corporate expertise and has since become the single work that many scholars identify as the point of transition from land art to more ecologically conscientious practices. This work, also called Notations of the Ecosystem of the Western Salt Works with the inclusion of brine shrimp, consisted of 4 ponds of saltwater and brine shrimp located outdoors on LACMA's campus. Against the tendency of earlier earthworks of the land art movement to expend large outlays of energy in carving up the landscape and introduce industrially produced materials into these environments, works by the Harrisons and many artists after them have claimed a distinction, in Newton Harrison's words, between using earth as material and dealing with ecology in the full sense of the term. 38 The Harrisons Shrimp Farm was conceived, in fact, as a direct response to Robert Smithson's recently completed spiral jetty in Utah's Great Salt Lake. As the story goes, when Newton Harrison first met Smithson, they talked about the tendency of the water around spiral jetty to periodically adopt a reddish hue, an effect of the carotene produced by algae in the Great Salt Lake. The higher the salt level in the water, the greater the red hue produced by these algae would be. With this tendency in mind, Harrison proposed to introduce brine shrimp at Spiral Jetty. The brine shrimp would feed upon the algae and could be harvested at the site. It was a suggestion that apparently held little interest for Smithson. The artist Robert Smithson became best known for his land art, in particular his work Spiral Jetty in the Great Salt Lake. In response, Newton and Helen Harrison decided in Utah that if they could not turn Spiral Jetty into a shrimp farm, they would make their own in Los Angeles instead. The work they created for art and technology employed different levels of salt in each of the 4 ponds outside of LACMA, creating an effect of subtle shifts in color from one pond to the next. Shrimp Farm also resulted in an actual harvest of shrimp from the ponds at the end of the exhibition. In these and other works in their survival series, the Harrisons sought to create living ecosystems for such organisms as fish, trees, potatoes, salad greens, and worms. By creating highly specific and localized living conditions, the Harrisons' survival works highlight the interrelations among organisms and the climate conditions required to sustain life in simplified, enclosed environments or systems. But as their practice would come to demonstrate, the idea of any ecosystem being truly closed was a fallacy that relied precisely on the short-term constraints of the survival pieces, which were created only for 2 or 3 month periods of time. A significant change in the Harrisons' approach arrived through the formation of a multifaceted work called the Lagoon Cycle that occupied the couple from 1972 to 1984. The project began as yet another survival piece, using a crab species native to Sri Lanka and an indoor, simulated estuary, and gradually transformed into a much larger and more ambitious meditation on the scale and integration of ecosystems across the entire Pacific Rim. The Harrisons' original plan was to cultivate the Psyllus aerata, or mud crab, in a closed laboratory environment. The project had similar goals as previous survival works in that it sought to produce an edible food source in controlled, replicable conditions and to study the behavior of the resulting ecosystem. This particular ecosystem, however, would not be limited to a predetermined period of time. Rather than being commissioned for an exhibition, the mud crab's tanks were set up in the Harrisons' Southern California studio using timed lights, limited temperature fluctuation, and controlled salinity in the aquatic environment to mimic the conditions of a tropical, estuarial lagoon. As it turned out, the very duration of this piece would prove critical. Late in 1972, during the same time when monsoon season would have arrived in the mud crab's native Sri Lanka, the Harrisons noticed an unexpected change in the crab's behavior. In response, the artists attempted to simulate monsoon conditions by decreasing salinity and increasing available food. As a result, they triggered mating behavior among the crabs, the first known instance for this species in an artificial environment. Through this simple discovery that the crabs required periodic changes in the steady state of their ecosystem to survive, the artists were forced to reconsider the type of enclosed, artificial ecosystems they had simulated to date. In response, the Harrisons moved out of the laboratory. Under the new title of the Lagoon Cycle, they expanded their experimentation with estuarial environments through 7 increasingly expansive cycles and, importantly, introduced new ways of presenting their work that included Robert Smithson's land artwork Spiral Jetty and Great Salt narrative voices, performance, and printed matter. Lake. The Harrisons' Shrimp Farm was conceived as a direct. The Lagoon Cycle is exhibited as a series of 7 response to Spiral Jetty large panels incorporating text, maps, and cut by Nether's own work. CC by Say 4.0, https, Commons with photo collage. The text on these panels tracks the Harrisons' engagement with estuarial lagoons for mud crabs as told through an oblique dialogue between 2 characters, a lagoon maker and a witness. The first 3 panels examine the move from indoor tanks to outdoor environments. The 4th describes moving the crabs to a series of ponds cultivated in California's Salton Sea. The 5th and 6th introduce and then reflect upon a bold proposal to regulate salinity, herbicide, and pesticide levels in the Salton Sea by connecting it to the Gulf of California and the Pacific Ocean. And the 7th provides a meditation upon the Pacific Ring of Fire, which connects Sri Lanka to the American West Coast. Thus, first with survival works such as Shrimp Farm and next with the beginning of their Lagoon Cycle, the Harrisons conceived of their artwork as both a means of investigating ecological issues and prescribing solutions. From the 1980s onward, this practice addressed a broad array of topics, ranging from local issues pertaining to Baltimore's pedestrian promenade and the Netherlands' central ring of agricultural land, to more global ones, including glacier depletion and international deforestation. Selected work: Hans Haacke, Rhine Water Purification Plant, 1972. Hans Haacke was born in Cologne, Germany, in 1936, and has been based in New York City since 1965. Early in his career, he was associated with the Zero Group in Europe, which formed in Dusseldorf in 1957 and was known for using new technologies to create moving, or kinetic, artworks. Hake has been a leading proponent of several contemporary art movements, including land art, kinetic art, conceptual art, and institutional critique. Institutional critique refers to artworks that bring to light the structures of social and financial power that give prominence and prestige to art museums. Hake created Rhine water purification plant. Hans Hake photographed at the Paula Cooper Gallery as a site-based installation at the Museum House. Photo credit, Misha Friedman for the New York Times. Langen Krefeld, Germany. As a functioning greywater reclamation operation, it is an artwork that epitomizes Hake's engagement with different kinds of systems, including those that are economic and environmental. While humorously called a purification plant, Hake's installation was much smaller than a full-scale industrial plant. However, it did functionally clean polluted water from the nearby Rhine River. Water from the river was pumped into the gallery space and then purified through a process of passing through basins treated with chemicals and over the top of filters composed of charcoal and sand. The clean water filled a rectangular plexiglass prism on the floor. To demonstrate the effectiveness of the artwork water treatment system, Hake added living goldfish to the rectangular tank. Excess water was pumped outdoors into the museum's garden, which could be viewed through a window in the exhibition space. Hake's creation of a functional water purifying system in Krefeld extended a series of preceding works that incorporated both real-time water cycles and ecological concerns. Around 1963, he began experimenting with the movement of water within plexiglass containers. The best known of these experiments is the artist's condensation cube of 1963-65, a plexiglass cube filled with a small amount of water in the bottom, in which the relative temperature of the box's environment influences a cycle of evaporation and condensation that is visible inside. Other works of this period also address the liquid state of water more prominently. In Wave, 1965, a rectangular prism suspended from the ceiling swings in subtle variation with air currents in the room and the movement of liquid within the box. Other related works employ plexiglass walls and horizontal layers across which forms of liquid and steam drip, sway, and plop. In Hake's own account of these works, he describes art objects and the conditions of life within its environment as a continuous system. A sculpture that physically reacts to its environment and/or affects its surroundings is no longer to be regarded as an object. The range of outside factors influencing it, as well as its own radius of action, reach beyond the space it materially occupies. It thus merges with the environment in a relationship that is better understood as a system of interdependent processes. These processes, transfers of energy, matter or information, evolve without the viewer's empathy. In works conceived for audience participation, the viewer might be the source of energy, or his mere presence might be required. A system is not imagined, it is real. 39. Following the exhibition of these wind and water works as they were named by Jack Burnham, Hake was invited to participate in Earth Art, one of the seminal early exhibitions of land art, which was held at Cornell University in February-March 1969. Each of the artists invited was provided their own gallery in Cornell's Andrew Dickson White Museum of Art to display work indoors and also given the opportunity to make artwork outdoors. Hake decided to create original works in both spaces. Indoors, he moved a large pile of dirt into a solarium, which he planted with fast-growing ryegrass seeds. During the course of the exhibition, this work, titled Grass Grows, sprouted a mound of tall grass, Hans Hake's condensation cube. Around 1963, Hake, which then withered and died before the exhibition, began experimenting with the movement of water within plexiglass containers, closed. With Grass Grows, Hake created and by Hans Hake, 1936. Photo of work taken by Uploader, CC by 3.0, artwork that displayed a full cycle of life and death. https:// Outdoors, Hake ventured into one of Cornell's gorges, beneath a waterfall, connecting a rope from the top to the bottom of the falls. He intended for natural water spray frozen on the rope to form a sculpture he titled Ice Road. But, like many ecological systems, the weather was more unpredictable than Hake anticipated. Given its location in upstate New York, Cornell typically has a consistently cold winter climate. But during the course of Earth Art, a warm snap melted all the ice on Hake's outdoor artwork, leaving only an exposed rope. Hake's interest in both water cycles and organic materials contributed to Rhine water purification plant, but beginning with a work titled Momopole in 1970, his practice also extended to include the systems of institutional influence as well. For Momopole, he once again used the form of a plexiglass box, which this time was not filled with water, but instead was empty with a slot cut into the top. The work's participants encountered a sign asking them to vote yes or no to a question about the Southeast Asian policy of New York's then governor, Nelson Rockefeller. Given that Rockefeller was also a member of the board of trustees at MoMA, New York's Museum of Modern Art, and its former president, Hake's artwork asked participants to also consider the relationship between the museum, U.S. politics, and the ongoing Vietnam War. The following year, Hake created another work of institutional critique titled Shapolsky et al. Manhattan Real Estate Holdings, a real-time social system as of May 1, 1971. The work was comprised of 146 photographs of apartment buildings in Manhattan and documents detailing the activities of one of New York's biggest slumlords over the course of many years. Haake intended to debut the work within a Anna Persson exhibition scheduled to open at the Solomon R. Guggenheim Museum. While Haake Shapolsky was not directly about the Guggenheim or any New York museum, the director of the museum nonetheless cancelled Haake's exhibition 6 weeks before it was scheduled to open, in an attempt to censor the artwork. Despite the fact that all the information it contained had been drawn from public records, the cancellation of the Guggenheim show became a notorious piece of art world news, so that when Haake began Rhine water purification plant the very next year, he may have harbored concerns about the relationship between Museum House Lange and wealthy industrial magnates responsible for the Rhine River's pollution. In fact, as part of the installation, Haake included the names of the local companies most responsible for the Rhine's pollution. As he explained, in 1972, the city of Krefeld poured about 11 billion gallons of untreated wastewater into the Rhine. As part of a large triptych in my installation, I listed all contributors to this mess, including the number of gallons of their respective contribution. The largest polluter was a factory situated right on the Rhine that was part of the giant Bayer Group of corporations. 40. However, unlike the director of the Guggenheim, the director of the Krefeld Art Museums, which include the Haus Lange, was supportive and even connected the artist with local experts who provided technical help in both the creation of his filtration system and the collection of information on pollution statistics. As Rhine water purification plant reveals, there is a deep interrelation between the natural resources of our communities, the institutional spaces in which the public views art, and the contributions of artworks in realizing a cleaner environment. Selected work. Nancy Holt, Sun Tunnels, 1973-76. Nancy Holt, 1938-2014, was born in Worcester, Massachusetts, and raised in New Jersey. As a college student at Tufts University, she studied biology, which would inform many of her later works as an artist. Her art practice ranged across the land art and conceptual art movements, and she worked in various media, including sitta-based sculpture, poetry, sound art, film, video, photography, artists' books, and drawing. She also made artworks in collaboration with her husband, Robert Smithson, including the tongue-in-cheek film East Coast West Coast. In 1995, she relocated her practice from New York City to Galisteo, New Mexico. Sun Tunnels is one of the prime examples of the Nancy Holt visiting her work. Up and Under, in Hämeenkyrö Monumental, outdoor earthworks of the land municipality in Finland. Art movement. It consists of 4 large concrete by Fishfriend. Own work. CC by Say 3.0. Cylinders set into the Great Basin Desert in Utah. https://commons.wikimedia.org/w/index.php?230222003. Configured in the shape of an X that measures 86 feet on the diagonal. Each cylinder is large enough for visitors to walk through, which is a vital element of the work since that passage affects the experience of sound at Sun Tunnels and also creates circular apertures for viewing the landscape. The opening in each cylinder also aligns with the setting sun of the summer and winter solstices, on June 21st and December 21st, respectively. Holes in the shape of a constellation of stars, 1 per cylinder, representing Draco, Perseus, Columba, and Capricorn, are cut into each cylinder. Holt directed the production of Sun Tunnels with the assistance of local contractors, who cast the 22-ton cylinders, drove them to the site specifically selected by Holt, and placed them on concrete foundations. Despite being incredibly heavy and large, the foundations provide the impression that each cylinder sits flatly on the desert floor. In her essay Sun Tunnels, published in the April 1977 issue of Art Forum magazine, Holt directly links the earthwork to her general experience of the western United States. I went out west for the first time in 1968, she writes, with Robert Smithson and Michael Heiser. As soon as I got to the desert, I connected with the place. Before that, the only other place that I had felt in touch with, in the same way, was the Pine Barrens in southern New Jersey, which only begins to approach that kind of western spaciousness. 41. The experience of time is a key consideration of Sun Tunnels. It is an artwork that took Holt 3 years to plan and execute. She first began planning the work while in Amarillo, Texas, in 1973, at which time her husband Robert Smithson was working on another earthwork called Amarillo Ramp. While flying over its site, Smithson and the plane's pilot tragically crashed and died on June 20th. Afterward, Holt completed Amarillo Ramp in collaboration with other artist friends and created a video work called Boomerang with Richard Serra in an Amarillo television studio. People gather at Nanny Holt's Sun Tunnels to view the summer solstice sunset on June 20th, 2021. By Matthew Cole. Own work. CC by Say 4.0. https://commons.wikimedia.org/w/index. The following year, she continued the plans for Sun Tunnels by searching deserts in New Mexico, Arizona, and Utah for an appropriate site to place the work on flat ground, with a full ring of low mountains visible in the background. The site she settled on and purchased in northern Utah is the former location of an ancient body of water called Lake Bonneville. The completed Sun Tunnels invoke universal cycles of time through their alignment with the patterns of the rising and setting sun along the Earth's orbit. In the years immediately before Holt's death, Sun Tunnels also acquired unusual, circular markings within the interior of each concrete tube. Before her death in 2014, Holt surmised that these were traces of bullets shot through the tunnels by local residents of the area, even though Holt did not plan these marks. As an artist, she understood them to be a part of Sun Tunnel's life in its environment and thought they should be left untouched by art conservators. Following the completion of Sun Tunnels and its publication as a creative essay by Holt, the artist also made a film depicting the creation of her work. In it, Holt spends considerable time showing the importance of working with skilled laborers and experts in other fields. While Sun Tunnels is a remote artwork that relatively few visitors have seen in comparison to similarly well-known artworks located in major metropolitan areas, Holt would carry through a number of the same interests in a piece she created over a period of 5 years from 1979 to 1984 in the Rosslyn neighborhood of Arlington, Virginia, lauded at the time of its completion as one of the first permanent outdoor artworks realized with funding from the National Endowment for the Arts. In addition to funds supplied by Arlington County and nearly a dozen local businesses, Dark Star Park dramatically changed the course of a debris-ridden site that had formerly housed a gas station and warehouse. Commissioned to accompany the construction of an office building at a narrow intersection of several streets feeding traffic into nearby Washington, D.C., Dark Star Park is a site that communicates with visitors passing on foot and those in cars, made up of concrete spheres, tunnels, metal poles, circular pools, and vegetation. Holt's work is a complex sculptural arrangement that plays upon a series of framed sidelines that change with the direction and speed of the approaching viewer. Like her earlier Sun Tunnels in Utah, Dark Star Park also operates between the real time spent looking at the artwork and more permanent, celestial patterns. Specifically, the work includes shaped metal shadows on the ground that align with the actual shadows cast by the sun at the precise time of 9:32 a.m. on August 1st each year. Thus, beyond its more conventional sculptural qualities to be experienced by walking through or driving past the work, Dark Star Park also embodies a cyclical time calibrated to the movement of the sun. While the time of day of 9:32 a.m. is seemingly an arbitrary choice on the part of the artist, the date of August 1st is a direct reference to the day in 1860 that William Henry Ross purchased the land from his father-in law that would later be named Rosslyn. As Holt once commented, by selecting that day for the shadow patterns to line up, I've sort of integrated the historical time of the place with the cyclical universal time of the sun and brought the two together. 42 in essence. Then, this site would seem to be a symbolic celebration of the founding of Rosslyn and its adjacency to the nation's capital, as well as the recuperation of a formerly derelict and polluted plot of land. As with the film of Sun Tunnels, Holt produced a Nancy Holt's Dark Star Park in Arlington, Virginia video work in response to Dark Star Park, titled Photo by Annis Hochländer Art in the Public Eye, The Making of Dark Star Park, 1988, which was made on the occasion of the 4th anniversary of the park. It begins with a general description of the trash site that Holt first encountered in the late 1970s. It had been a gas station, she says, and it had turned into a parking lot. It wasn't even a parking lot, it was just a place with broken asphalt and weeds and broken bottles and where people were parking. So I really felt that there was an overwhelming need for a park here and I was responding to that. 43. The video then turns to statements by the developer of the adjoining Park Place office building, the owner of the swimming pool construction company that crafted Dark Star Park's spheres with shotcrete, the construction foreman, and the landscape architect, all of whom add to the labor, expertise, and collaboration required to realize the completed site. From working with people so closely, Holt reflects, with the workers who actually construct my works, I realize how much art comes out of the matrix of society, out of how simply things are put together. 44 for Holt. The earthworks Sun Tunnels and Dark Star Park both address the systems that humans use to understand and experience time, while acknowledging that art is also intricately bound to its social system and the community supporting its production and use. Selected work. Mark Dion, A Meter of Jungle, 1992. Mark Dion was born in 1961 in New Bedford, Massachusetts, and has been recognized for conceptual art projects grounded in environmental concerns. In the 1980s, he participated in the influential independent study program of the Whitney Museum of American Art in New York, where, among other teachers, he studied with Hans Haacke. Like Haacke, Dion has been concerned with histories of museum display throughout his career. For Newcomb Vivarium, 2006, which is among his best-known works, he installed a 60-foot hemlock tree in a purpose-built greenhouse in Seattle's Olympic Sculpture Park, which allows visitors to witness the decomposition of the tree within its ecosystem. Alongside artist J. Morgan Poot, he created Millard's Lane in rural northeastern Pennsylvania, which is a permanent art site and artist residency committed to the intersection of art and ecology. Dion worked on A Meter of Jungle throughout the summer of 1992. It was his contribution to the exhibition, Arte Amazonas at Rio de Janeiro's Museu de Arte Moderna, for which he transplanted a section of the Amazon rainforest floor to the gallery and then set about systematically sifting through it to remove the invertebrates. Spotlit by a desk lamp while hunched over a makeshift desk constructed with saplings, twine, and tin cans. Dion carried out this work with tweezers and magnifying glasses right in the middle of more conventional sculpture and painting being displayed in the exhibition. What remains of this piece today is a photographic diptych showing the patch of forest extracted for Dion's contribution to the show. Lost in the static form of the orange flagging tape depicted in these photographs, however, is the disjointedness between the earthwork Dion created in the rainforest and the thoroughly mundane and likely inscrutable activity he performed on a daily basis in the museum. This mode of presenting the labor of taxonomic classification carries through other, similarly conceived works of the same period. Another reference point for a meter of jungle, for instance, was the early 20th century natural historian William Beebe, who in 1915 filled a war bag with a few handfuls of leaves, sticks, moss, earth, and mold of all sorts from the Brazilian rainforest artist Mark Dion has been recognized for conceptual art to dissect during his 10-day boat ride back home projects grounded in environmental concerns, to New York. 45. As an employee of the New York Zoological Park, now the Bronx Zoo, Beebe later founded a division he called the Department of Tropical Research. This title would in turn inform a work Dion produced earlier in 1992 called the New York Bureau of Tropical Conservation, wherein he sat in the American Fine Arts Gallery in New York day after day sorting through materials he had gathered the previous year in the Orinoco Basin of Venezuela, to be stacked on open shelves for display. At the time, The New Yorker quipped that this show would be of special interest to those scholars and voyeurs who are glorified file clerks at heart. 46. But looking back at this exhibition 3 decades later, its potential tedium for viewers, akin to that of a meter of jungle's entomological activity, is important for Dion's related interests in environmental politics, natural history, performance art, and the display conventions of museums. What can appear as simplistic scientific busywork nonetheless can have a profound effect on how environments are understood and treated. In general, both installations of 1992 were an outgrowth of Dion's concern for the tropics during these foundational years of his practice, and more specifically an outgrowth of an artwork from the previous year titled On Tropical Nature. For this work, Dion spent 3 weeks in a Venezuelan rainforest collecting all manner of flora and fauna that he dispatched weekly to the Sala Mendoza in Caracas to be unpacked by the museum staff and placed in rows, on tables assembled in the gallery, according to the order in which they are removed. 47. A sample of these deposits now composes the form of On Tropical Nature, having been divided into 4 discrete sculptures dispersed among different museum collections. Other samples were reused in the New York Bureau of Tropical Research. Dion's engagement with On Tropical Nature, which encompassed not only subsequent objects but also projects spanning the years 1991 and 1992 in North and South America, is fundamental to understanding the formative relationship of his work with ideas of ecology. For while his practice has keenly and consistently dealt with ecological crisis since the late 1980s, the environmental importance of Dion's work has been addressed by most critics as either an antiquated passion for natural history or strictly an activist call to action. Between these extremes of the deeper past and the immediacy of the here and now, his extended treatment of the tropical rainforest provides a more exacting view on the politics of ecology in the early 1990s. The tropics first appear in Dion's work in 1989, taking 2 forms. The first, interactive information stations, such as a library-looking cart called Tropical Rainforest Preserves, created the early 20th century natural historian William Beebe in collaboration with William Schefferin, and was a reference point for Mark Dion's A Meter of Jungle. The second, didactic video programs and pamphlets reporting on rainforest depletion. The tropical rainforest was a touchstone environmental issue of the late 1980s and early 1990s alongside that of the Earth's depleted ozone layer, acid rain, nuclear energy, and the rise of consumer recycling. But unlike the more sudden public outcry at the identification of an ozone hole above Antarctica announced in 1985, awareness of the rainforest as an environmental concern escalated more gradually, beginning with sporadic reports in the 1970s that increased over the next 2 decades. By the years 1991-92, the coverage of tropical rainforests had become remarkably extensive. Amid this attention to rainforests, it should also not be lost that Dion created A Meter of Jungle in the context of a United Nations Earth Summit in Rio de Janeiro in 1992 that was attended by 172 nations. As a milestone event, it was the first such gathering convened by the United Nations in 20 years. Regarding his use of the tropical rainforest as subject matter, Dion has explained in both interviews and artist statements that his work does not address tropical nature per se but instead the cultural representation of that idea across the past 300 years. 48. He equally recognizes that the lands of the equatorial tropics were a key location for European colonialism, wherein the Northern Hemisphere profited from the raw materials and labor of the Southern Hemisphere. By the 1990s, the nations of the Global South had officially been decolonized for decades, but the effects of colonization were still deeply felt in the environmental crisis of rainforest depletion, which was fueled by lingering inequalities of the colonial North-South divide. Thus, A Meter of Jungle is a work that simultaneously addresses a contemporary concern, while also performing the kind of extractionist natural science from the past that led to the current crisis. It is a work that is at once deadly serious, as it is also open to engaging with history in a performative and even satirical manner. Dion, after all, spent hours performing insect classifications that he knew were pointless. In all, a World Leaders Meeting at the Earth Summit in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, June 13, 1992. Dion created a meter of jungle in the context of this summit, which was attended by 172 nations. UN photo Michis Tsavaris. Meter of Jungle is an artwork rooted in the belief that building a responsible future involves working through the challenging legacies of the environmental past. Selected work. Pierre Huygens. Untitled. 2011-12. Pierre Huygens was born in Paris in 1962 and currently lives and practices in New York City. He studied at the National Supérieur des Arts Décoratifs in Paris and is widely recognized for artwork spanning many media. During the past decade, his work has been exhibited at prominent museums across Western Europe and the United States, including a 2015 commission for the Roof Garden at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York and a career retrospective that traveled to museums in Paris, Cologne, and Los Angeles. Huygens first emerged to international audiences in the 1990s through a series of digital and cinematic artworks dealing with issues of fiction and the blurring of artistic creations and real life. These include a video work titled The Third Memory, 1999, which was commissioned by the Renaissance Society at the University of Chicago and displayed on 2 channels, appearing on 2 side-by-side screens. The subject of the film is an attempted 1972 robbery at a Chase Bank in Brooklyn, New York, conducted by Jon Wojtowicz and 2 accessories. The robbery and hostage situation that followed became the subject of director Sidney Lumet's 1975 Hollywood film Dog Day Afternoon, starring Al Pacino. Huygens' Third Memory toggles back and forth between scenes from Lumet's film and present-day interviews with Wojtowicz, who by that time had been released from prison. The resulting artwork shows the manner in which the actual event of the robbery is no longer clear in Wojtowicz's mind, having been influenced by the cultural impact of Dog Day Afternoon. Likewise, Huygens' own artwork is not his creation alone, but a combination of contributions from others in the past and the present. During the same period of his career, Huygens launched an even more ambitious project of collaboration and co-authorship with the French artist Philippe Perreno, for No Ghost Just a Shell, a project whose title was inspired by the 1995 Japanese animated film Ghost in the Shell. Huygens and Perreno purchased the digital files and intellectual copyright for An Lee, a generic Japanese manga character from a company that developed stock characters for use in narrative cartoons, advertisements, and video games. The artists found An Lee in a mail-order catalog on sale for 46,000 yen, approximately $400. Working as a creative pair, Huygens and Perreno created several animated videos featuring An Lee, which they displayed at galleries and museums. In addition, they also made her image and character available to other artists. In 2002, an exhibition toured Zurich, San Francisco, and Eindhoven, showing 17 renditions of An Lee by 15 different artists. In the hands of Ringkrit Tiravanija, she recites hours of Philip K. Dick's Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep. From the design firm Paris, she appears in fractured form within a series of posters. In Joe Scanlon's interpretation, An Lee returns to anonymity as she becomes a stand-in consumer carpenter in a set of IKEA-like diagrams for assembling a bookshelf. This burgeoning project abruptly ended in 2002, when Huygens and Perreno removed her character from the public domain by founding a private company, the An Lee Association, and selling her rights to the company. Pierre Huygens photographed at his studio in Paris, for the emblematic price of $1, to mark photo credit. Julien Bourgeois for the New York Times. The conclusion of No Ghost Just a Shell. Huygens and Perreno set off a fireworks display in the Miami night sky on December 4, 2002, on the opening night of Basel Miami Beach, which they titled Smile Without a Cat, celebration of An Lee's vanishing, this time, playing on Lewis Carroll's Alice in Wonderland. As this account of Huygens' early career suggests, his art practice has not been as consistently dedicated to issues of ecology, in comparison to some of the other artists in this section, but it is important to understand the tendencies in Huygens' early works in film and digital media that inform the later, environmental turn in his art. In addition, it is notable where the conclusion of his and Perreno's An Lee project took place, called Basel Miami Beach during its inaugural year in 2002. What is now called Art Basel Miami Beach is one of the largest and most influential art fairs held annually in the global art market. It is an extension of the art fair Art Basel, which has been held in the Swiss city of Basel since 1970. An art fair is a gathering of private art galleries from around the world to sell select artworks from the living artists they represent. The prevalence and influence of art fairs increased substantially at approximately the same time as Huygens and Perreno's firework display, as more artists showed their work at galleries internationally, and those galleries themselves opened outposts in multiple cities across Asia, North America, and Europe. Primarily, the financial and visible world of art became more global. This globalization of contemporary art was also driven by the growth of international biennial exhibitions which had existed since the late 19th century, but proliferated in the 1990s and early part of the 21st century. Like an art fair, a typical biennial is a gathering of new artworks from around the world, put on display in a selected city for a limited period of time. But unlike the works in art fairs, artworks at biennials are neither owned by the institutions that stage the exhibition, nor are they for sale. The most influential of these biennial exhibitions include locations in Venice, Italy, Sao Paulo, Brazil, New York City, Gwangju, South Korea, and Istanbul, Turkey. As the name suggests, a biennial is an exhibition that is typically held every 2 years. The art exhibition named Documenta, however, is held every 5 years. It is a major art exhibition held in Kassel, Germany, which began in 1955 after the decimation of Kassel and many other European cities during the Second World War. Alongside the Venice Biennale, Documenta is the premier stage for artists to introduce new artworks to the hundreds of thousands of spectators who visit. What is more, for each iteration of Documenta, selected curators choose exhibitions throughout the city of Kassel, which can include both large, museum-like exhibition halls and also smaller, more unexpected and intimate places around the city center and its parks. John Wojtowicz peeks out the window at the Chase branch in Brooklyn in August 1972. The failed heist became the subject of Pierre Huygens' The Third Memory. Untitled was created specifically for the 13th iteration of Documenta, held during the summer months of 2012. The work marks a significant shift in Huygens' career and also in contemporary eco-art. The work is a site-specific installation created in a composting area, tucked away in Kassel's Karlsruhe Park. While clearly marked as an artwork on maps and brochures of Documenta 13, it is a work that was nonetheless difficult to locate. To mark the conclusion of No Ghost Just a Shell, Huygens and Pereno set off a fireworks display in the Miami night sky on December 4, 2002, on the opening night of Basel Miami Beach, which they titled Smile Without a Cat, Celebration of Anneliese Vanishing, consisting of vastly varied materials, including piles of flat, square concrete bricks, a sculpture by the artist Max Weber, consisting of a reclining nude female whose head was covered by an active beehive, a bench created by the artist Dominique Gonzalez Forrester, an upturned oak tree from an earlier Documenta project by Joseph Buys titled 7,000 Oaks, an attendant walking through with a white dog, one of whose legs was painted bright pink, and various species of plants. Huygens' Untitled was a work that was both constantly changing in appearance and also deeply integrated into the ecosystem of its composting site. The materials of the site themselves also existed in a state of flux. In earlier artworks, such as The Third Memory and No Ghost Just a Shell, Huygens had dissipated his own role as singular artist into creations made by others previously and in his own time. With Untitled, he extended the same idea, but instead of only incorporating other human artists, he also invited natural processes, such as the decomposition of a tree or the generative production of honey by bees, into the ongoing, unstable condition of his work. It was an artwork that was inseparable from its environment, a canal in Kassel's Karlsruhe Park. The park is the site of Pierre Huygens' Untitled, by user Karoy on the Wikipedia. Description: PHPQ. Unlike other artists who have created site-specific sculpture, however, Huygens did not simply mark the site of Untitled with something like a monumental sculpture, but instead introduced multiple interventions. Some items were new and placed by the artist, and some, like Marcel Duchamp's Reanimades a century earlier, were found and claimed by the artist. The importance of Untitled is that it didn't allow its viewer to settle on one object or image of what the artwork was. It, like all ecosystems, remained on the move and was unpredictable throughout its months of display in Documenta 13, raising the question of what really separates an artwork and its ecology. Section IV Summary 6. Beginning in the 1960s, artists interested in both ecology and informational systems started to think of artworks as a kind of ecosystem. 6 artists using systems experimented with different ideas about what an ecosystem is, some being closed and self-contained and others being open to dramatic changes over time. Selected work: Helen and Newton Harrison, Shrimp Farm, Survival Piece No. 2, 1971. 6 Best known as the Harrisons, Helen and Newton Harrison were artists and partners who collaborated with one another and pioneered the establishment of contemporary eco-art. A common theme throughout their career is that their artwork had a tangible impact on improving the environment. The Harrisons' earliest systems works were 6, a series called The Survival Pieces and included Shrimp Farm, Survival Piece No. 2, 6 with Shrimp Farm and related works. The Harrisons shifted away from previous artworks that used the environment as sculptural material and instead made works that consciously involved the interactivity of ecosystems. 6 The Lagoon cycle of artworks the Harrisons made in response to the Survival Pieces shifted their attention from closed living systems to open ones. Selected work: Hans Haacke, Rhine Water Purification Plant, 1972. 6 Across his career, Hans Haacke has been a leading proponent of several contemporary art movements, including land art, kinetic art, conceptual art, and institutional critique. 6 Rhine Water Purification Plant is a functioning greywater reclamation operation and epitomizes Haacke's engagement with different museum displays kinds of systems, including those that are 6 A Meter of Jungle was Dion's contribution economic and environmental, to the exhibition Arte Amazonas at Rio de